Jon Snow is not Aegon Targaryen. His name is not Aegon Targaryen because Aegon Targaryen is a completely different character. Now, this isn't to say that Jon Snow isn't a secret Targaryen, and I'm not even saying that he isn't necessarily Rhaegar and Lyanna's son. All I am saying is that his name is not and never would be Aegon. And the reason that in the TV show you are told that his name is Aegon Targaryen is because the showrunners fucked up the ending. Please allow me to explain how the wires got crossed, how he became Aegon when he isn't actually Aegon, and why it's all so confusing. Something you'll hear online is that George R. R. Martin hasn't finished the books because the show showed us the real ending and everyone hated it, and so he doesn't want to write the books anymore. And quite frankly, that's kind of bullshit and not true. No, I can't speak to the reason why he's a slow writer, but what I can definitively say is that the TV show ending is not the real ending. Why? Because half the story is missing. And no, I'm not talking about the books that aren't written. I'm talking about the storylines and the characters that exist and are leading towards the ending. The TV show, in its adaptation, cut half of them. You have over a dozen characters with important roles to play who all have their own storylines going, who are fully cut from the TV show. Now, this becomes a problem for the TV show because the TV show still wanted to head towards George's ending. Because as the show appeared to be overtaking the books, they went to George, and George spilled the beans. He gave them some sort of a list of facts, some sort of outline. We don't know how detailed, we don't know how sparse it was, but we know that he gave them some stuff. And then they basically took their show and they tried to steer it towards that ending. But the problem is if you have cut half of the storylines, half of the characters that lead you to that ending, but you still want to head to it, you have to figure out other ways of getting characters and plot lines heading in that direction. And quite frankly, this is why the TV show feels so weird towards the end, because suddenly the characters are not acting like themselves, and half of them feel like they've suddenly taken stupid pills. It's because all of the sudden we are barreling towards an ending that we do not have all the pieces to get to. So the technique that they use to get people there is they start combining storylines. So the storylines and character moves that get made by the characters in the storylines that were cut need to be reassigned to the existing characters within the TV show. And so that's going to feel weird when certain characters are suddenly acting a particular way when they've never, behaved that way before, but it's because they're having other people's shit put on them that they are now having to do that feels out of character. And so enter this nonsense right here. The show decided to take their two secret Targaryen storylines and combine it into one. Because yes, I think that Jon Snow is Rhaegar and Lyanna's son, that he is a secret Targaryen. Now, I say think because that isn't something that has been confirmed in the books. That is something that hasn't been revealed, even if most of the book community would agree that that is most likely the case. I'm going to need the Ned and Ashara truthers to sit in the corner on your hands and not talk. You're going to confuse these people if you start talking. Please, some self-control. But if Jon is Rhaegar and Lyanna's son, why isn't he named Aegon? In the show, Lyanna said that his name is Aegon. That's because they combined that storyline with another one, namely Aegon Targaryens, also known as Young Griff. Okay, so allow me to explain. You have Rhaegar Targaryen up here, you have Lyanna Stark right here. In the show, these are Jon's parents. Rhaegar kidnapped Lyanna in the show. It was consensual. And then they made a baby. She had the baby. She passed away in childbirth, but said, hey, the kid's name is Aegon Targaryen because he's Rhaegar's son. Therefore, that makes him the heir to the Iron Throne. That makes him the rightful king of Westeros. Not really, because they're actually tweaking some details here. Because the show conveniently forgets about Elia Martell and her children. So remember, Rhaegar, before he kidnaps Lyanna, had a wife. His wife is Elia Martell, and with his wife, he has 2 children. So before Jon ever hypothetically enters the picture, he already has 2 older siblings. Half-siblings. And so here's the issue. Rhaegar's 2 children are Rhaenys and Aegon. And so in this clue that we get, when Daenerys is in the House of the Undying, and she's having all these visions of the past and stuff, she sees her brother Rhaegar with Elia Martell right after they've had their son Aegon. And again, not Jon Snow, because remember, Jon Snow, if he's Rhaegar's son, is Lyanna's child, not Elia Martell's. So in this scene that Daenerys is seeing from the past, Rhaegar is looking at Aegon and saying, the dragon has 3 heads, there needs to be one more. Because remember, at this point, he's had 2 children with Elia Martell, a Rhaenys and an Aegon. Now, Rhaegar was convinced that his child was going to be the prince that was promised, Azor Ahai, the fulfilling of that prophecy. And he came to believe that in order to help his child, rise to that prophecy, that he needed to recreate the Conqueror and his siblings with his own children. Which is why his first child is named Rhaenys, after the youngest of the Conqueror's sisters. And then there was Aegon, the second child. And then the plan was to have a third child, his Visenya, thus completing the 3 heads of the dragon. Now, this isn't to say that it is necessary for an Aegon to be the prince that was promised. For a while, a lot of people thought it was Rhaegar himself. Notice, his name isn't Aegon. Aegon isn't a necessary name to have to be the prince that was promised. But the problem is, when he wanted to have a third child, he couldn't, because Elia Martell was a very, ill woman. She just, wasn't healthy ever her entire life, and childbirth was very hard on her and almost caused her to pass away both times that she did it. So it's heavily speculated that because Rhaegar was obsessed with fulfilling this prophecy, that he realized, I need to figure out how to have a third kid, and I can't have it with my wife. Enter Lyanna Stark. Rhaegar meets Lyanna, we can assume thinks, hey, that's the woman that'll have my third kid, my Visenya, because remember, he wanted a daughter to complete the conquerors in his children. He was not trying to have the prince who was promised with Lyanna Stark. He thought he already had that child because he had his son Aegon with Elia. Now, before any of that can be completed and he sees his vision fulfilled, he gets offed by Robert Baratheon in the rebellion, and then Lyanna Stark passes away in childbirth, probably having Jon Snow. But before Lyanna has Jon Snow, what happens to the other kids, Rhaegar's other children, Rhaenys and Aegon? Well, the sacking of King's Landing happens when Tywin takes the city and the Mad King is offed, and it's during that sacking that supposedly the children are unalived. But, very big but, according to some characters in the story, there was a switcheroo that was done. So according to the story, Varys was able to sneak out Aegon, Rhaegar's son, this Aegon right here, before the sack of King's Landing happened, and spirited him away to be raised in secret. So when the children were offed by the Lannister men, it wasn't actually him, it was just a rando. Now, in the present day, when Tyrion is traveling in Essos to try to get to Daenerys, he meets up with this group that contains this child named young Griff. Young Griff is a teenager that is about the same age as Aegon Targaryen would have been around the sack of King's Landing. And Tyrion is able to deduce that this kid is Aegon. Or at least he thinks he's Aegon. We're actually not sure if he really is Rhaegar's son or not, that Aegon that, was supposedly off during the whole sack of King's Landing, but he thinks that he is. So young Griff says his name is Aegon Targaryen, making him Aegon the 6th Targaryen, and he is currently invading Westeros. So this Aegon Targaryen is a direct threat to Daenerys' claim, because if he is Rhaegar's son, his claim is better than hers. So what the showrunners seemingly did to streamline their show is they combined the 2 secret Targaryen storylines into one. Jon being the secret Targaryen child of Rhaegar and Lyanna, and then young Griff, the hidden secret Targaryen who everyone thought had passed away. So rather than the show introducing young Griff here, they look at Jon and say, hey, what if you are a legitimate child? What if you're not just Rhaegar and Lyanna's son, but what if we make it so that they were secretly married, making you a legal threat to Daenerys? Because in the books, Jon is probably not legitimate. He's probably still a bastard. He's just Rhaegar and Lyanna's bastard. Because there isn't any need for him to be legitimate. Rhaegar just wanted a third child, a daughter, to complete his little trilogy of kids. But because the TV show, in heading towards their ending, needs a Targaryen that is a legitimate legal threat to Daenerys, we need to make him legitimate. So Lyanna and Rhaegar got secretly married, even if that doesn't make sense within the lore and how the religions work, but whatever, he's Aegon Targaryen now. we're going to give him his name and his legal status to Jon Snow. Jon Snow needs to become that extra claimant to the throne along with Daenerys. And so when you want to ask, well, what's Jon Snow's real name? I don't think he needs a secret Targaryen name. He's probably a bastard, so I really just think his name is Jon Snow. He's Jon Snow, the secret Targaryen. Okay, good night, y'all.